Okay, everybody, good afternoon to you. This is JP with Green Cloud Defense. Hope everybody's doing fantastic today. As we all know, we're here to chat about security. Obviously, it's a fluid conversation in our lives, in our clients' lives, and our partner lives. So hopefully today you're gonna leave here with a better understanding in terms of, yes, what it is that we offer, but more importantly, as the slide says, how do we position it? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce a good friend of mine who's also going to help me facilitate this conversation. Jack Bailey is with me. He is the Director of Channel Enablement. And so what does that mean in plain English? Well, for you partners, it means that he makes your lives easier, right? So a lot of the content, a lot of the LMS systems, a lot of the things that you interact with us on a week in, week out, day in, day out basis, you probably are passing by Jack in some form or fashion. So Jack, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to bring him in on the conversation in here in just a bit. However, before we get started, let me go over just like 3 simple housekeeping items. Obviously, it's as we were joking right before this, it's kind of like the boarding door is now closing sentence there as you walk into an airplane, right? But at the end of the day, if you want to have and drive conversation, throw questions into the chat function. We're going to try to do our best to administer it. Jack said he'd hold me accountable, and I'm going to try to hold him accountable to doing that. So throw that there. We will attack those along the way, hopefully. And in the event that we miss that, we'll try them at the end. So at the end of this, and for those of you who have found any piece of this engaging, want to have some follow-up conversations, or maybe you just have a couple more questions that you didn't want to verbalize here, reach out to your channel managers, right? That they will help you through the engagement process, making sure that we connect the dots, getting you aligned with the proper people internal over here at Green Cloud Defense. Now, as we walk through this, let me share with you exactly what it is that we're going to chat about today. I'm going to share with you some updates that we have here at Green Cloud Defense. As you probably saw under Jack's name and title, he has a little logo called iLand, and underneath mine, there's something called Green Cloud Defense and 1111 Systems Company. We're going to talk through all that here in just a second. So we're going to unpack what all that means. Secondly, we're going to go real deep into the security stack, which all of us want to really understand what it is that GCD has historically done and what is it that we're doing now. So whether it's continuous risk, which we added late in the year last year, or managed firewall, SIEM, and EDR. We're going to go through each one of those and what that means. There's a lot of folks that are in the marketplace today that are always asking me, well, how did you decide on those specific things? And why aren't you doing X, Y, and Z? And it's for simple and very good reason. It's because we did not want to be that Swiss Army knife kind of, we're good at a couple different things, but we're doing a lot of things. We really wanted to be masters of the craft, right? So we're very specific in what it is that we do. And for those of you who have heard me talk about cloud positioning in the past, it's a similar track, right? We want to be awesome at the things that we provide for our partners. We don't want to be generalists to a lot of things. So let's get moving. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about that 1111 Systems name. Now, you kind of keep hearing about little bits and pieces, but over time, you're going to see that 1111 Systems name really grow, especially under the Green Cloud portfolio of services. So for those of you who do not know, for partners and prospects alike, at the tail end of last year, 1111 Systems purchased Green Cloud Defense. And it was a great relationship from day one. These guys came in and literally within 1 month later, they purchased our best and biggest competitor in the space, iLand. Hence, that's where Jack came from. So it was awesome. So iLand brought to us not only a global data center play, but they also did the same things that Green Cloud did on the back of disaster recovery, business continuity, product solutions, as well as infrastructure as a service. So the two combined companies, as we move forward, we will progress in becoming an 1111 Systems. Now, with that being said, we are still going to be true to the products and services which we sell and where we service them. You are going to be able to procure each one of those services that you've been utilizing Green Cloud for in the past, but then in a future state, you'll also be able to transact business in different data centers. So let's talk through what that looks like, if you will. So just as I mentioned, we're remaining true to what we've always done from day one. Literally since 2011, we've offered cloud-based services, whether that's infrastructure as a service, backup as a service, disaster recovery, or desktop as a service offerings. All of those offerings we've rolled out to you all over the years, and you've brokered those services. Most of you take those products and you put them on your paper, so you're controlling the client relationship, you control the margins. But at the end of the day, you're reaching out to us to leverage our team and our stack to maintain all of the infrastructure, right? That's one of the big value adds. So going forward, you're going to continue to transact those products and services. You're going to still be able to consume those products and services on a flat rated, predictable based billing model, making it easy and proactive for you to have good conversations with your clients, as opposed to a reactionary conversation in terms of what does this elastic bill mean, right? That's not what we're here to do. So when we rolled out managed security at the tail end of, 2019 going into 2020, and then it really matured last year as we brought the SOC in-house, we allow you to procure those services under the same billing methodology, right? Whether that's managed firewall, email security, SIEM, EDR, or vulnerability scanning. Each one of those are not an elastic-based billing product. It's definitely a consume-based service for you to take, put it on your paper, rebill your client. Once again, you continue to own the relationship. As you can see in the middle of the page, though, we have not changed our game plan. So Cisco infrastructure is still Cisco infrastructure. It resides in each one of our data centers. We're still utilizing VMware. We're still utilizing Veeam, Fortinet, and Zerto to develop and provide for you those backup as a service, disaster recovery solutions. And it's a way for you to continue your data protection plan for each one of your clients, regardless whether it's in our cloud or whether it's on your client premise. Makes no difference to us. So as you pivot and look at the right-hand side of the screen, one of the things I'm going to really ask each and every one of you to focus in on is look at the blue dots. Historically, I've always shared with this crew right here that, we transact business in 6 different geodiverse data centers in the United States. The blue dots signify what ILAN brought to the table. And so this is so cool. So now everybody can transact in 9 different facilities here in the continental United States. And obviously Spokane, Washington, that is still our SOC, our Security Operations Center. Now here's a cool thing. Fun fact for everybody, quiz at the end. We also, by way of ILAN, are now able to offer and procure services in Canada, the UK, Amsterdam, Singapore, as well as Australia. So literally, we are a global reaching cloud entity. So what's changed? The geodiverse reach. What hasn't changed? Our go-to-market strategy. That's by way of you, right? The partner community. So let's cut to the chase. Let's get to the meat and potatoes. Many of you see me at peer group organizations, you see me at trade shows, you see me at conferences, or you see my team, and we're consistently being asked, okay, JP or JP and team, my MSP, my VAR, my consulting firm already sells services to whatever, the end user community, right? However, I need help positioning those. So as we pivot from what Green Cloud traditionally does, we really get into the chops of managed security. I really want us all to leave here with understanding that positioning your security posture is not a set it and forget it mentality. It's literally a fluid conversation. And so if you're doing your customers justice, you should be sharing with them that vulnerabilities and threats are obviously evolving. So the same endpoint solutions that you may have sold to them or provided for your end users, they're going to have to change. They're going to have to change as the world changes and evolves. And unfortunately, as the threat landscape matures, people will have to adopt different technologies or supplement what they've had over the years. So I think from a positioning standpoint, when we walk away from here, that's one of the things I want everybody to unpack is make sure that you're setting yourselves up for success versus failure. So please, let's get out of the world of just selling a product for selling a security product. Let's sell a posture. So with that posture being said, I'm going to bring Jack in on the conversation. So Jack, another question that we're consistently asked is, how'd you choose your framework? How'd you choose your go-to-market? And walk us through the methodology. So everybody, Jack Bailey.
Yeah, so happy to be here, JP, and thanks for everyone for joining us today. I think we got a lot of great content for you. Exactly as JP was talking through about the positioning piece, the biggest thing I want to say is think holistic, right? Think of helping customers not with a specific part of their security picture, but understanding all the threats, all the aspects of their environment, and where we can help along the way. So to that point, there's a number of different certifications and frameworks organizations can adhere to. CIS, NIST are common ones that come to mind. And I like using the NIST one because it's very simple as there's 5 main categories. Of course, there's subcategories under that. But for a lot of organizations, it's really easy for them to wrap their head around. You're talking to your customers, they have a number of vendors, they have a number of partners possible that they're working with. It's so easy to say, let's focus on these 5 things. Let's make sure you're good here. So what does NIST have associated with it? At the end of the day, NIST is really about helping an organization identify the assets within their environment and what's critical to have protection for. Obviously, building on that, once they've identified the assets, they need to make sure that they have systems in place to keep those assets protected, right? But as we all know, and as we'll dive deeper in the conversation today, the best laid plans still can have vulnerabilities. End users are a big risk to an environment. There's a lot of the risks we'll talk about. And so when things happen, an organization needs to have a way to detect that something has happened and obviously make sure that it does as little damage as possible, contain it as quickly as possible. The other element as well is with end users everywhere, with devices and data everywhere, all things we'll talk about here in more detail in a few moments. We need to have the ability to proactively respond, not waiting on things, but actually have automation and playbooks and plans in place to contain threats where they lie. And as JP mentioned up front, if everything else goes sideways, a strong recovery plan to a known good point in time, whether it's through backup or disaster recovery or cut over to production resources from a cloud perspective, all these things really build on each other. Now, one of the things I really like about the simplicity of these 5 things within this framework is it also really aligns well with the Green Cloud and 1111 systems offerings in our go-to-market strategy here. So when it comes to identification, and over the next few minutes, we'll talk about each of these individually. Some you may already be familiar with, some you may have questions on. That's the whole goal today, right? Is to talk about specifically how do all these layer together to provide your customers with a better security strategy than a point solution, as JP was mentioning a minute ago. So when we're thinking about identifying, one of the things that you can position in your head is, how do I help customers identify potential risks in their environment? Start thinking about vulnerabilities, things that maybe have not been exploited yet, but are risks, maybe a level of threat in their environment the customer can't go without mitigating, right? Can't address. So being able to help the customer identify where there's vulnerabilities in their environment and be able to remediate those before they become a larger issue is so critical. When it comes to protection, we're going to go into a little bit more detail around managed firewall, right? Obviously, when we think about keeping the bad things out and letting the good things in, network and perimeter security is a critical element. Many of you on the call already know this, but we'll touch a bit on the managed firewall piece. We'll go into a lot more detail around SIEM, right? And as JP was mentioning, we're going to spell out why vulnerability scanning and why SIEM are different. They're both critical, but they're different. Where SIEM is much more about something that's happened. And now you need to know how you're going to respond, how you're going to contain that after something's happened in place. We'll go into a lot more detail about how our managed SIEM really helps you and your customers cut through all the noise and focus on what really matters in terms of remediation. When we talk about EDR, again, this goes back to response. Our goal is with workers everywhere, data everywhere, for us to have playbooks and policies in place where when end user behaviors or things happen on their end user devices, we can proactively take care of those before they become a larger issue. And obviously, the overall 1111 systems organization with Green Cloud, with Island, and a lot of the heritage, very, very strong heritage in the backup and DR space, we have a really great plan for providing the backup and replication. One key thing I want to talk about before we dive into these individual things is a customer may have some of these in place. You may have even sold some of these to them in place, but I'd really recommend that when you go to a customer, and we're going to talk about this with our opening question here in a minute, that we're not just focused on what are you doing on the firewall side or what are you doing on the backup side, but really look at this as a overall, what are you doing to make sure you're overall secure? Where do you have certain gaps? Where can we help? Knowing that this 1111 Green Cloud offering can help a customer with any of these, but we can also go for a larger puzzle at the end of the day and helping the customers out with that. Now, with that being said, JP, I know that you're obviously talking to partners.
Yeah.
You're hearing some of these questions. You know what's on customers' minds. You want to tease up a little bit around some of these opening questions and conversation starters on that larger, broader picture we were talking about?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, we get the question a lot, like, how do we begin the conversation? And you can unpack it two different ways. Number one, if you are a hunter or somebody selling new logos, if you're working for a managed services company or a VAR that you're selling, your goal is to sell new business. How do you start that conversation? Or let's say that you're a solution architect or an engineer that works for, say, a managed services company or a VAR consulting firm that is working with an existing customer that maybe has turned you down on certain security initiatives in the past. I think a good way to start the conversation is this. I mean, it's simple. It's like, hey, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you view your environment today? Well, if I'm a betting person, everybody thinks they're 5 if you can read the slide, right? Everybody wants to pretend that the castle's protected, they got the moat, they have the knife, they have it all. But the reality is it won't happen to me mentality still exists out there. Is that fair, Jack? I mean, at the end of the day, there's no way in this day and age that unless you've partnered with an organization that's smarter than the smartest person in the room, there's just no way to catch everything. And if nothing else, you need to have a partner out there that can help you catch what you've missed. So that's the point here. But I love on a scale of 1 to 5. So whether you are a sales personality or you are that solutions architect that's working with existing customers or a VCIO that's doing QBRs with your clients, all this is such a great way to get the conversation. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, some of the challenges, right, is a customer may say or may hope that they have a level 5 there, but we know, right, that currently today, right now, there are enough open positions for security personnel that's equal to 70% of the overall employable market just in the security space, right? So customer says, hey, I'm a level 5 here. Hey, how have you done so well with hiring security staff during the shortage here, right? How have you dealt with the rising insurance costs with them nearly tripling or quadrupling in price in the past few years? How have you dealt with the compliance stress to your organization? So absolutely, JP, there's so much to dig in on here because we know, and we're preaching the choir here, we know that there's so many factors that just customers on their own, as you're mentioning, cannot be prepared in a way that we can better assist them at the end of the day.
You know, the other thing before we move through this, the other thing I'll bring up too is how do you handle the person or the person that you've introduced security solutions to that's kind of said, absolutely not, it won't happen to me. I mean, those people are out there, right? I mean, they happen to, we interact with them all the time. I would share this with you too, that make sure that you're doing yourself a good service by providing almost an infographic that shares with the end user, with that client of yours, what it is that you're actually providing and what is the business objective and goal that thing protects, right? So align your solutions and identify it with what the client can relate to versus just talking about bits and bytes. But if you can speak it in terms of their language, and in the event they continue to still turn you down, well, then at that point, you need to make sure that they've signed off on the fact that they've declined that service. So with that being said, Jack, I'll kick it over to you to continue.
Yeah, so let's do exactly what you just said, JP. So one of our goals for the remainder of the call here is to really talk in terms of business value with each of those 4 solutions we've been talking about, which be continuous risk, managed firewall, managed SIEM, and managed EDR, right? Because you certainly can talk about in terms of bits and bytes. You can talk about it from a fear and uncertainty and doubt perspective, but let's really talk about the value it provides your organization at the end of the day. So we're going to begin with continuous risk scanning. And again, if we're thinking about this NIST framework that a lot of your customers are looking to adhere to, we think about continuous risk scanning with really helping identify, right? And so what does continuous risk mean? It means that we're helping identify what vulnerabilities a customer has within their environment. So got a quick sort of visual for each of these solutions that we're going to talk through here, right? And a lot of these, you'll look at this, you'll say, hey, this looks familiar, right? Simply put, organizations are more distributed than others, or more distributed than ever, I should say. Even SMB and mid-market are battling with this hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, distributed workforce team approach. And this makes everything harder to manage. And one of those things that makes harder to manage is security as well, right? We're going to talk about this from a lot of angles today. But what does this mean in terms of vulnerability? Well, These same team members that are now having to manage applications at a number of sites, helping users access it all over the place, are getting notifications and alerts and vulnerability threats data from all over the place, right? And at the end of the day, they really just want to be able to focus on what matters. So here's some really interesting statistics, because I think when you're talking with customers, being able to talk to them again about, as JP mentioned, how does this impact their organization? Your customers are dealing with 55 new vulnerabilities published every day, every single day. If they're running an existing vulnerability scanning tool, or if they're doing this manually or whatever they're doing, every day there's at least 55 on average that come out, right? And some organizations have tens of thousands of these and other alerts to sift through. Now, we already talked about some of the staffing challenges out there, but an average organization of any size, this is true for enterprise down to SMB, with the size staff they have and the number of machines that an organization has and the ratio, if all they did was focus on solving vulnerabilities, they'd be able to solve maybe 15% of them. The light at the end of the tunnel, why you're positioning continuous risk scanning to a customer, is of all these vulnerabilities, the 23,000 that have been published this year, the 55 a day, all that noise that your customers are having to deal with, on average, there's only about 4% of them that really pose a real risk to your customer's environment, which means that they're weaponized, that they're remotely exploitable, that they're known in the space and have people trying to really utilize these to capture data, to cause harm to a customer's environment. It's about 4%. So what really, at the end of the day, continuous risk scanning does for a customer, for your customer, is be able to help them focus on what matters, right? So you take those tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that are published each year and you say, okay, let's use this SaaS-based offering with continuous risk scanning to correlate and understand what's really a threat. What's the impact to an environment? And this is not only done through this database where people publish what risks look like, but it's also done where an organization could come in and basically say, on a scale of 1 to 100, here's how important this machine, this application is. And when it shows them their vulnerability score, it's actually adjusting for the business impact of that vulnerability. Now, this is something I would say, if you haven't sold this tool or if you haven't approached a customer on it, definitely contact your channel rep. It demos so well, and it has the ability to scan with no installation in the customer's environment to show them at a glance what some of these risks look like. And then it's also a tool that can show them very easily, hey, out of all that noise, here's the 4% that matters. You click on that, here's what to do, here's how to address it. So at the end of the day, that's really what this is providing, is helping a customer before it becomes an issue, patching vulnerabilities in their environment, cutting through the tens of thousands, and really focusing on what matters. JP, I guess, what would you add to that? And what are you listening for if you're focused on this vulnerability and risk scanning technology?
Yeah, well, so I'll share this with everybody as I kind of address that. Number one, we've got a more recent partner, and I don't think that he would care if we shared this story. He'll remain nameless. But at the end of the day, he said, do you realize what you're providing for me? And I was like, I'm providing continuous risk scanning. He said, no, you're helping my team go find the issues. That's what you're helping me do. So what you're doing, JP, is you're providing me a tangible asset called time. So we are pointing his team to where he needs to pay attention, if you will. And then from there, we can help translate what those top vulnerabilities are that he needs to attack. And then from there, he can share with the end user a reporting system that makes sense to that end user. So if you think about it, we are here to be a supplement to your bench, right? And that's what this software is designed to do. The software, anybody can go buy software, but really it's the team behind the software that's allowing and helping you ingest it and make sense of this. So if you're having proactive conversations with a customer that may not have a scanning tool or software device, I would encourage you to listen out for things like, well, how do I stay on top of things and all things from a vulnerability perspective? So that's a little bit about reality and what we're hearing out there, Jack.
Absolutely, that makes sense. If you're hearing those questions, if you're seeing those concerns on the customer side, what are you typically following up with or asking? What resonates with the customer? How can you dig deeper on that?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we as the trusted advisor to the end users, you got to continue just literally throwing out there what is all over the front page news and reversing that into what does become an immediate actionable item for the business, and twisting and turning it back to the goals and objections or objectives of the institution, helping them just align themselves so they don't miss a beat, hence so they don't show up on the front page news. So
yeah, that's a good point. And to that point, right, with so many threats coming out, I know the question on the screen talks about, hey, when vulnerabilities are released, how do you prioritize them? I mean, we all know about Log4j just a month or two ago, right? And asking your customer a little bit about how did you deal with that? How did you identify the systems in your environment that needed that fixed quickly? How did you understand the business impact to it, right? So there's unfortunately plenty of real world examples of why this is critical. And it is a great question to ask, Log4j being a very easy one to begin that conversation with right now.
right on.
Yep. So let's shift a little bit, right? Obviously, we have identify, and we've been talking about risk scanning and identifying vulnerabilities before they're exploited and cutting through all that noise. Let's talk a little bit about protection, right? Many in this crowd are probably familiar with the concept of firewalls, obviously. So we'll move through some of this quick. But JP, I think you've got some interesting talk tracks to go through. But when I think about the firewall piece, I think about it twofold. One, probably the easiest objection and the most common one you'll ever hear is every customer out there already has a firewall, and many of them already have some sort of management, either doing it themselves or another organization doing it. So some of the easy things for me to begin this topic of next gen and managed firewall components is, you all know this, right? Customers have data everywhere. They want it to be secure. They want it to be seamless. Threats continue to rise. And in many cases, organizations have a 7-year-old Cisco ASA or God forbid, a PIX or something of that nature that literally has an access list that they set up 10 years ago that nobody's touched, and they're expecting that to capture the threats to their environment from a protection perspective. Or they've acquired new organizations, or they're moving to this multi-cloud hybrid cloud strategy, and they've got a bunch of different devices to manage in different sources. And then at the end of the day, I've already mentioned 70% of the active, or the number of open jobs in the security space is equal to 70% of the total employees out there. People can't find help on this. The person that set it up initially may not be there anymore, and people may make no sense of what was initially configured. So as many of you know, customers are having challenges with this. But JP, you have a unique perspective here, having worked with a lot of your partners on the firewall side. What do you want their key takeaways to be from in terms of the Fortinet story and in terms of the management capabilities here?
Yeah, so two things. I'm going to hit you guys with two big rocks. Number one, you probably have everybody under a firewall, right? So you either are a Fortinet user or you're not. So here's the first thing. If you're not a Fortinet consumer, don't think that this doesn't apply to you. So case in point, we have a huge managed services partner that's out of Minneapolis. They are not a Fortinet shop. However, they are in hyper-growth, hyper-acquisition mode. They acquired a firm that was a Fortinet shop. However, the existing team that resides on the legacy bench, they're not poised to manage Fortinets. So the initial question was, how much does it cost for you guys to manage all that? And really, when we got into the conversation, it was, we are delivering more than just the management of the Fortinet for that individual user. So we brought to them the expertise. Now I'm going to flip, and here's the other big rock for you all that are in the managed firewall space, and you're specifically managing Fortinets, and you want to maintain that. That is a-okay with us. However, if you're looking to provide some, I guess, more eyes and ears within the environment, please reach out to us. Or if you're looking for some help when it comes to, looking at all things from a security perspective, or you're just looking for some, obviously, some assistance with, future deployments, that's what we're here for. So regardless whether you're an existing Fortinet fan or you're soon to be. So that's exactly like the roads that I see people going down, Jack. So you either are a Fortinet individual, or you probably are going to work with somebody that has a Fortinet down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And knowing that unique positioning, and obviously, as you were chatting, JP, I was bringing up some things that many in the crowd probably already know, right? Next gen firewalls are all about taking that basic sort of access list approach and set of users and the set it forget it approach, and be much more dynamic in nature, right? Basically detecting threats and doing something about it in real time, filtering web content. But that management piece is really the key piece at the end of the day. So I'm curious again, when you're hearing partners have success on this and they're identifying how to position either updating the firewall or the management components there. Are there any keywords that you're hearing, any questions that you're asking them today?
Yeah, 100%. And I'll actually kind of tell on myself, but if I rewound my life in 2010 is when I got into the managed services space. In 2010, there was a mentality out in the world of set it and forget it. I hope that we would all agree that those days are long gone, right? So at the end of the day, back in the day, it was we got your firewall set up and we're watching it. Now there's too many things to watch, right? So so things to listen for are obviously if you have a client, maybe you're not a Fortinet shop, but however you pick up a client that has an existing Fortinet firewall and you need to continue managing that'd be something key to listen for. Think about people that are leveraging SD-WAN and technologies that are obviously in multi-locations, or it's just a mobile workforce that are connecting back to a centralized spot. And obviously you're looking for a bigger bench to support your needs for content filtering. And obviously you got a dedicated team in order to help you do that. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Let's move on in the conversation just a little bit around to the managed SIEM component here. So if we think back to the NIST diagram, I'm going to pull it up real quick for everyone in the audience, right? We've talked about identification, obviously, where vulnerabilities are more in the preventative nature, right? We're looking at things before they're exploited so we can patch them and reduce the likelihood of having an impact later on, having the headline occur later on, right? So identification is really key. We talk about the protection piece and how, protecting the perimeter and making sure that the bad things stay out and the good things get in was where we were talking about before. But when we were positioning this idea of this NIST framework, we know that things can still happen. There's internal threats, there's external threats. There are gaps in everyone's security strategy at the end of the day, and there's things that can happen on systems and tools. So when you think about SIEM, I want you to think of it almost as the other side of the coin from a vulnerability scanning perspective, right? CRS was about finding things before they happen, things that can be patched and remediated and rectified before they're exploited. SIEM is much more around understanding, well, what has happened? What is going on in my environment? And what can I and should I do about that, right? So we have sort of a similar diagram here to the vulnerability one, but instead of thinking about things in terms of what should I patch to avoid an outage or to avoid security risk from happening, when we think about SIEM, we once again can think about how these systems are everywhere. Admins may have dozens, hundreds, or thousands of different systems and tools. This could be a network device, a server, a storage appliance that may have all different log methodologies, that may have all different approaches to how things are documented. And so obviously, if you're looking at just the SIEM part of it, having something that aggregates and correlates all of those, normalizes them down where a human can read them and understand what to do with them, is what a SIEM would provide. But obviously the management piece is a critical aspect as well. So for those of you that are less familiar with this idea, right, we've got all this noise coming in from all these different devices. And what this managed SIEM solution does is it utilizes the FortiSIEM technology, where basically there's a number of different sources for correlating that data, looking for threats, understanding what's happening in an environment like a brute force attack, a user logging in from a different geography after logging in just a few moments ago. Obviously, hundreds of different examples there, but there's correlation. And then what really comes into play is the 1111 Green Cloud team looking at this with tier 3 technicians on the SOC team and basically saying, hey, I'm looking at this further, I'm escalating this, I'm analyzing the logs, and I'm doing something about it. And that's really where the success comes into play, is not having things that are used for root cause analysis after an outage occurs, but being able to see things happening in near real time in an environment and being able to take action. And there's a lot of success stories of somebody having that brute force attack, our team detecting it, letting the customer know exactly what's going on in the environment, the steps to take to prevent it from happening again, and to keep it contained within the exposure they've had today. JP, what would you add to that, if anything?
Yeah, a lot of folks that we either have started working with or have worked with over the years, and I'll chat about those first. So when we first rolled out SIEM a couple years ago, we had a lot of folks, if a managed services company had 100 customers, they may only have like 1 to 2, maybe 3 customers that cared or were compliance driven at the time. Obviously, SIEM came along with that. Now what we're seeing is it's like the insurance conversations are driving the behavior to procure certain products. And I hate to say that, when bad things happen, people then start adopting technologies, but then people are trying to find that silver bullet as to what happened, right? And I think that more proactively, the more and more of our partners that have these tools and systems back behind a team that's helping you look at these things, that's where the rubber's hitting the road. And that's what we see. And thankfully, we see a lot more of our partners wanting to be proactive in front of it versus reactionary, trying to reclaim or rebuild, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So other than sort of that compliance nature piece of it, what else is driving the conversations? What are you hearing your partners and customers say at the end of the day that would peak and basically say, hey, that's a reason to dig deeper into the SIM conversation. This would help them at the end of the day.
100%, 100%. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with some of the visuals that you've got up here, right? But I think I mentioned it. Compliance drives a meaningful windfall of business these days. The fact that there's a lot of insurance, like cyber insurance, people have to have these type of technologies, regardless whether it's SIM, whether it's EDR, vulnerability scanning, the list can go on and on. I would definitely keep your ear and your pulse on the market in terms of what compliance initiatives are being pushed down in some cases from federal and state governments. Be on the lookout for how you can get in front of it and how you can be seen as the go-to de facto managed service partner within each of your respective communities. Because if you can put out proactive, good content that people gain value from, that is huge. And I think that the products and solutions kind of take care of themselves as you're transacting and as you're communicating in the space. Make sense, Jack?
Absolutely does. And so if I'm taking what you're saying there, obviously the insurance piece is critical, positioning yourself as an expert is critical as well. And really just helping the customer understand that if they don't have a good answer in terms of visibility on what's going on in their environment, they can either be compliant, they can either take care of their customers, and at the end of the day, it leads to a bad thing. So SIM is hugely helpful. But also we're going to shift the conversation a bit as well here and talk about those end users, right? Because we've been talking about the servers, we've talked about the network security, the perimeter piece, logs, other elements like that. But we know when it comes to the security story that the end user is often a big surface area for attacks. And there's also so much changing in the space. So let's talk about managed EDR for a few minutes. And again, we've got a little bit of a diagram here. Oh, sorry. We've got a little bit of a diagram that normally builds out, but honestly, I'll just leave it built here. I'll rewind back a little bit. So we know that end users have a lot of threats to them, right? You can get a suspicious looking email and click on it. There's malware, there's viruses. There's good people that are working at home, that are working from a number of locations. They're distracted. They click on something they shouldn't. And malicious insiders, this is really big growing threat where a good employee gets their username and password stolen. And because of that, they now have access to that device and maybe anything else that user has access to. There's updates in the way attacks work where they're now fileless in nature, and it makes it harder for traditional legacy antivirus to capture things. Everything we've been talking about so far is all about trying to build this fortress, right? Defense in depth, having a strategy, having this layered approach. But the reality is, the users that were once behind these castle walls, even as short as 4 or 5 years ago, that were in an office day in and day out working in these castle walls, are now on the road, coffee shop, hotspot, hotel room. I guess, JP, you're even a good example of this today, right?
Listen, I'm a perfect case study, Jack. I'm a case study. I didn't say that I made front page news. I'm a good case study because I am everywhere all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the office is where you're at these days and work is what you're doing at the moment. There's definitely been a dramatic shift, and I'm preaching the choir here with your partners. But the fact is, though, if I'm working at a coffee shop, I don't have, in many cases, those 7 layers of defense or 5 layers of defense in front of me. I have my laptop, and I'm really leaning on the end user to make good decisions there. And the reality is that organizations are shifting and they're training. Hey, don't click on this. If you see something, we would never ask you for payment. We'd never do this, right? You see it from everywhere. But the reality is mistakes still get made. The sophistication of attacks, the cleverness of people capturing data and targeting end users and doing very, very targeted attacks mistakes happen, right? So end users are a big source of risk to an organization, and that's where EDR comes into play, right? So EDR, the E in EDR, if you don't know, is endpoint, right? So we're really talking about wherever these workers are, we need to make sure that we have something on their systems, on their workstation, that if any of these risks happen, the organization that you're working with, your customer, has a way to understand what devices are out there in the open, what status, what visibility and analytics are happening in their environment. And when a risk occurs, can I do something automatically? Can I stop that risk right where it lies, right? So leveraging these remediation and protection strategies to say, if this risk is occurring, quarantine this computer, delete this file, scrub this registry, do these things dynamically, and then give the 1111 Green Cloud security team visibility into that, the analytics of where that came from, how it occurred, how we can prevent it from happening again, and doing all those things. Now, here's one of the really key things, right? As you all know, working with Green Cloud and now under this 1111 umbrella, there's a very high touch white glove experience the customers get with this. When we think about endpoint, one of the challenges a lot of organizations run into is, you've probably heard that phrase, the cure is worse than the disease, right? Where sometimes the medicine and the side effects are even worse than the illness in the first place. Antivirus and endpoint detection could be a really good example of that, where you're trying to prevent the end user from doing something foolish or malicious, but in that point, you're hampering them from doing their normal work. So one of the things I love about this is the 1111 Green Cloud Security Analyst piece. There is a onboarding process where all the devices go into the sandbox type environment. And for a week or two, we look to see what false positives and what normal things are. And we rule those out so an end user doesn't have this brick wall they're hitting their head against, can do their normal daily job, but we're truly validating and protecting them where it really matters at the end of the day. JP, I know, again, you being a road warrior, you probably have a lot of opinions on this. Where's your mind go on the EDR store here?
Especially for all of our partners and our prospects that are on this, I think one thing that is relevant is we all live in a world of like multitasking, right? Here's my iPhone, right? So I think if you can share stories with your end users on real life examples of how these solutions back into like solving their issues, right? I think about myself sitting in a Starbucks today. I'm utilizing Slack, email, and I'm on the phone. So I'm multitasking. Everybody can relate to multitasking in this day and age. And if they can't, I don't know what they're doing. But at the end of the day, that's where issues happen. People slip up because they're trying to do too many things. And you have to have that kind of catcher's mitt that's watching and being ready to isolate instances in the event that things happen. So as I perused and was looking throughout that Starbucks, there was probably 10 to 12 different people in there, and they were all doing the same thing. Everybody had earbuds on. They were working on one thing, but had either multi-tablets or had multi-applications open. That's where error exists. And I think that if people start picking apart the endpoint solutions that you're driving home for each of you managed service providers and VARs, those are the stories that obviously lend you street cred, right? That you can say, hey, this is where we can help you. And if you have a remote workforce, obviously you got the AVs but you have to be willing to respond to those threats. So sell the solutions by way of stories that people can relate to. So that's what I'm here. So that's the day in, day out of me being on the road. I see it all the time, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a number of ways to dig in there. I love the story-based approach, but also hearing the customer story is so critical as well. So just understanding, talking to them, how would you deal with this? It's a reality. It's going to happen. If an endpoint's compromised today, how do you quarantine it? How do you remediate it? How do you prevent that from becoming a bigger issue, knowing that a lot of all the other things we've been talking about today can be impacted as a device gets infected, as a device gets compromised, as a user's credentials get stolen, right? So really, really critical thing. And unfortunately, all too common, that insider protection threat, again, second leading cause of cybercrime today. So it's a big one there. So team, we've covered a lot. And for many of you, this is a review, but we really hope this gave you an idea of where to position these and why it's not just a point solution, but it's an overall suite of products that really help an organization, one, with the compliance story, for the insurance piece of it, for mitigating, for all those things. But two, how each of these layers on top of each other, and how an organization that really understands the vulnerabilities that they have, they're protected at that network level, that can see what's going on in their environment. Again, with the SIM piece, this could be from an infected user causing issues to other devices within their environment, how they can prevent that end user from having access. And as many of you know, working with Green Cloud over all the years, that really strong backup and replication story for if everything else goes sideways, where they can revert back to a clean copy at the end of the day. So I guess, JP, I'd love to turn over to you. Are there anything else on the sort of holistic story, defense in-depth strategy that you want to nail home before we wrap up for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, I'm going to challenge each and every one of you all that attended, and for those of you who will be viewing this, number one, understand your clients. Understand your clients and correlate risk through the eyes of them and what any adversities would hold them up from achieving. And don't necessarily worry about the quote unquote products, right? And helping somebody understand the products. But if you can twist and turn how we can solve the issues to the common problem to prevent them from having issues, that's critical. No, so know your audience. Number two, share real life stories where applicable. Yeah, we can all throw out what happened to Walmart or what happened to Target or whatever the big box provider is that had a bad day in the cyber world. I would change it a little bit. Share the remote worker story that is sitting at Starbucks, that gets busy, that just so happens to potentially click on that link, right? That's not, everybody can understand that and they can think through that. But if I'm a 15, 25, 50 person organization, I probably can't put myself in the same room as those large institutions because it'll never happen to me, right? So those are a couple things that really stand out. Our product set, and by the way, this is where we'll bleed into the questions. I got a text message from an individual just now who said, back in the day, Green Cloud, at one point in time, you would help us with, say, a pen test. What are you doing now is the question. What I would unpack there is, if you do have needs for certain things like that, come to us. We've partnered with organizations that are proficient in those initiatives. And what you see here on the screen is what we're going to dial in and be very awesome at. So obviously reach out to your channel managers in terms of anything on the security front. And if it's something that we can help you with, fantastic. And if it's an area that we need to push you to a trusted partner, by all means, we're going to do that. So Jack, how about yourself? Any questions come through for yourself as we were talking through this?
Yeah, one that comes up for me often, I think you touched on a bit at the beginning, but I'd love to get your perspective on it, is that whole story about not calling the baby ugly, right? You're coming into an environment and you're talking to someone who's maybe running the security side, doing the best they can. They're probably shorthanded. They may not have focused on this or have expertise on this. How do you and how have you guided your partners on sort of walking that line between creating the sense of urgency, but not at the same time overstepping with that? Because I know there's a line to walk there. What are your thoughts on that?
Call the baby ugly, Jack. Call the baby ugly. At the end of the day, you can definitely call the baby ugly. You run the risk of walking out of that office without the business. I think that there is some street cred to being just kind of in your face about some of the security initiatives. I also think that there's a level of finesse that each one of us have to have, especially in the world of cohabitating in the IT space. So in the event that you're an outsourced managed services company and you're working with somebody that has internal IT, you do run the risk of calling whatever it is that they've created ugly, right? If you've created that masterpiece yourself, well, you own it. However, what I would encourage everybody to delve in on is understanding where to position the products and solutions and identifying any gaps in someone's portfolio. So as opposed to saying, hey, your baby's ugly, you could probably say, let's identify all of the key areas of focus. And oh, by the way, if we could help from an impacting perspective, how we could bolster or mature this piece of it to help round out, go that way. And then over time, once trust is earned, deliverables have been dealt, then you're in a position to really go in and really take the lion's share of the business. Does that make sense? Or at least
It
that's where
does.
I would make sense.
No, I
To
have a
me.
similar approach. My approach is helping the customer call their own baby ugly as well, right?
There you
You've
go.
probably seen this. You've probably seen this in the questions today, but I'm always of a mindset of if you have a challenging situation like that, it's always easy to tell the stories. And JP, you've done a really good job today of reminding everyone to tell stories through this. When you tell stories, it can help disarm a customer, right? I'm preaching to the choir. You all know this, but being able to say like, "Hey, I came across a customer and they had this in their environment and this led to these challenges and that's why we had to help them," start letting them know that people have challenges, right? Whether it's in the backup and DR space or security space, and showing how you've helped address that may help them open up a bit more to that, and they may actually be able to see themselves in the shoes of somebody you've helped out along the way and come to terms with the fact that they aren't that 4X5, that they do have some of those gaps at the end of the day as well.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. The other thing that I think Jack started hitting on it is obviously trust is earned, especially in the security space. You just can't launch into the best thing ever, or the best whiz bang thing, as Jack and I like to say, in hopes that everybody's going to buy it, right? So at the end of the day, I encourage everybody to definitely share the stories, earn the trust. Over time, you're going to have a seat at the table. Once you're at that table, don't do anything to burn the bridge, right? Especially if it's taken you a long time to get there. Hey, other questions, since we're here on this page now, and we'll come to a close here in a second. I also get the common question of, can you help me from a gap analysis perspective? And the answer is yes. From if you think about all the things that we do, we can kind of figure out where people are today, what good looks like tomorrow, and kind of unravel a roadmap for people to work towards that good, if that makes sense. So that's a common question that we got. The other question that I get a lot of times, and actually it came through under the Q&A section for me, and that is this: do you have the ability to ingest other things other than what you're presently offering? So underneath the hood, as we've made reference to this on this call, we are a Fortinet partner. And so with all things in the managed space that you see here on this screen, all but continuous risk scanning fall within that Forti suite of services. We will be rolling out, and I'm going to go ahead and throw the cart before the horse, but let's just call it in Q3, Q4, SOAR will be deployed and completely available. So we are going to be taking other points that we can ingest. And it doesn't necessarily need to be all of our stuff. So two of the big common questions that I get, Jack. Anything else from you, though?
No, I think that's a great point. And today, obviously, a SIM, despite it's FortiSIM, just logs from every type of device, 70 pages of compatibility sheets for SIM, right? So don't let that hold you back today. Same thing with continuous risk scanning. So there's already things on the truck, regardless of what the customer has running in their environment, you can already help them out with that as well. So great compatibility.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I think it goes without saying from all of us here on the Green Cloud 1111 systems and the iLand teams, we're totally stoked to support you and all your initiatives. Reach out to your respective channel managers if you have follow-up questions, concerns, you need documentation, or you just want to learn more, right? That's what we're here for. We'll help you unpack. So Jack, thanks so much for helping me today. I think this has been great. It's been beneficial. I always learn a little bit through each one of these. And hopefully for you Green Cloud partners, you got to learn a new face and name today. So Jack, welcome to the club, my friend. We appreciate it. Thanks for all the help, guys, and have a great afternoon.